Yo, 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 what it do? What it be? Oh, it's your boy, A-N-T, repping the game, gang. Y'all know we don't play none of that. You's a lame, you can't hang, all of that. Bang, bang, and I'm back again. Today with a somber video, y'all. I ain't gonna hold you. So let's get right into it. Let's take a time machine and go back to January 31st, 2000. It's a Monday. And on that episode of Monday Night Raw, Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, Dean Malenko, and Perry Saturn, would all make their debut for WWE. Now, they started the show as fans. Now, by the end of the show, they were attacking Billy Gunn and Road Dogg, more infamously known as the New Age Outlaws. Now, everybody had known, who these guys were because these were the waning days of the Monday Night Wars. They had seen these guys on WCW, on television, on Turner broadcast television numerous times. They knew who these guys were. So it was pretty much known at the time by insiders that these four men had signed to WWE from WCW. This was when WCW was bleeding money. The NWO story had grown stale. Hulk Hogan's creative control was leading to a lot of wrestlers to grow frustrated with the direction of the company. The veterans were getting paid exorbitant amounts of money to essentially to have Hogan just look good or just sit at home and do nothing. And Hogan's affinity for not wanting to do business, that's what wrestlers call it, it made it hard for WCW to do business in general. Like I said, WCW did have talented guys like Guerrero, Saturn, Benoit, Malenko. But according to Eddie Guerrero, it was Kevin Nash's belief that guys like Eddie Guerrero and all the guys I just named were too small and boring to ever be big names in wrestling. And to my knowledge, Kevin Nash has never apologized for this or anything. And he was kind of wrong. And I'll get to why here in a second. Before WWE would acquire WCW and all of their wrestlers and library rights, they did sign guys like Chris Jericho, William Regal, and the Four Radicals as the faction of Saturn, Guerrero, Benoit, and Malenko were dubbed. Those were just WCW talents, though. WWE would also sign talent from Extreme Championship Wrestling, most famously Mick Foley, aka Mankind, and Stone Cold Steve Austin. But later on, Lita, the Dudley Boys, and Taz would all sign to WWE before ECW would close its doors for good. With WCW and ECW folding before the end of 2001, WWE would not only have essentially a monopoly on televised wrestling, but now they had an influx of talent on their roster, and they had to figure out what to do with them. Eddie Guerrero, who was in a storyline relationship with a woman named China that ended with him cheating on her and rejoining the Radicals. However, that was due to him actually battling demons outside of the ring. He had picked up a painkiller addiction, which stemmed from a 1999 car accident, and he was written off of television during the infamous Invasion storyline, which left a huge stain on wrestling. Essentially, it was WWE guys wrestling or battling the newly acquired ECW and WCW talent in a battle for supremacy. Sounds great in theory. WWE fumbled the hell out of it, and that's putting it really lightly. But Eddie Guerrero was sent to rehab by WWE, and in storyline, he was injured to explain his absence. Then on November 9th, 2001, Eddie was arrested for drinking and driving. 3 days later, WWE released him. Earlier that year, Chris Benoit would break away from the Radicals and start his famous feud with Kurt Angle. This rivalry would put Benoit on the map, and Benoit would even wrestle Stone Cold on a couple of occasions for the WWE Championship, albeit in losing efforts. But the seeds were planted for Benoit to not only be a threat to the championship, but be a main eventer in the future. Ironically, too, Benoit would miss the Invasion storyline completely as well, but for a legit neck injury that he suffered during a TLC match on May 31st, 2001. And even during his broken neck, he was still wrestling Stone Cold. So, I mean, he was wrestling with a broken freaking neck, wrestling for WWE Gold. And wasn't Kurt Angle an Olympic gold medalist, but Benoit was by far one of the best talents that they had in the ring, for sure. On April 1st, or when Benoit returned in 2003, he would be partnered with none other than Eddie Guerrero. And I wasn't hip to the game back then, so I had no idea that Eddie Guerrero had spent the last year in wrestling exile, essentially wrestling on independent circuits and getting his life back on track for a WWE return. And then on April 1st, 2002, Eddie Guerrero returned to WWE on Raw and attacked RVD. And for some reason, this always stands out in my mind, probably because it was near my birthday. But also, like, when Eddie Guerrero returned, he had this Mexican mullet. His matches were really good, but his promos were very passionate. One might even say his promos had some Latino heat to them. And Latino heat would be a perfect description and nickname for Eddie Guerrero. He earned this during his time romancing China, but this Eddie Guerrero didn't burn with the passion of love. This version of Eddie Guerrero was wrestling and cutting promos like a man possessed and obsessed with being the best and not letting his third chance at being a superstar escape him. Benoit was he was mid to weak on the mic, but his in-ring work was art. Chris Jericho often referred to him as Mr. Roboto due to his promos that were kind of just basic wrestling promos, if that. And, you know, he delivered his promos with the emotions of a carrot. Benoit wasn't loud or animated in his emotions. He earned his name the Rabid Wolverine for his tenacious in-ring wrestling style that was fast-paced and hard-hitting despite his small stature. Benoit earned this reputation as a legit grappler and even had another name, the Crippler, which he started calling himself after he accidentally broke fellow wrestler Sabu's neck during a match in the OG ECW. And just to even further get into Benoit's wrestling roots, he modeled his whole style after the Dynamite Kid. And if you do any kind of research or look at the dark side of the ring on Dynamite Kid, tremendous worker, tremendous wrestler, terrible human being, absolute shitbag of a person. Not one someone would model their career after, maybe in ring. But unfortunately, modeling after Dynamite Kid and working yourself like that, and making sure your shit looks legit, comes with the price, unfortunately. And we'll talk about that again later. But by 2003, Benoit had established himself as an upper mid-carder and was facing top stars and constantly in title situations, but he never won the big one. Eddie Guerrero had formed a legendary tag team with his real-life nephew Chavo Guerrero, and honestly, Los Guerreros didn't get a long enough run in my opinion, but Eddie's star was rising so fast. His charisma and his gimmick of lying, cheating, and stealing to win matches despite being, the bad guy or the heel, he made the fans cheer for him. The fans loved it, whether he was a good guy or a bad guy. The fans didn't want to boo Eddie, but he could play the heel so well that they hated him at times. He knew how to make the crowd react to how he wanted. And in a sense, that's wrestling, baby. Like, that's what it all is. Eddie was clearly becoming a fan favorite, and by 2004, he was embroiled in a feud with then WWE champion Brock Lesnar. This feud cemented Eddie as not only a believable main eventer, but a believable champion, because on February 15th, at the No Way Out pay-per-view, Eddie Guerrero did the unthinkable and beat Brock Lesnar to win his first WWE champion, making him a Grand Slam and Triple Crown champion in the process, meaning by this point he had held every major title in the company. It's one of the greatest feel-good moments in wrestling, and Eddie Guerrero's Addiction promo is one of those promos up there with, that's up there with Dusty Rhodes' Hard Times. It's up there with Austin 316. Maybe not Austin 316, but it's up there. And now it would be Chris Benoit's turn, but he too would face seemingly impossible and insurmountable odds as he would enter number 1 in the famous 30-man Royal Rumble, and he would outlast 29 other superstars, lasting for an hour, and he last eliminated the 500-pound Big Show to earn the right to face a champion of his choosing. Now, during this time, Brock Lesnar wouldn't get his rematch against Eddie Guerrero at Mania. Instead, he would face Goldberg in possibly one of the worst matches in WrestleMania history before leaving WWE to pursue his dream of playing for the Minnesota Vikings, which didn't pan out, but he actually ended up as a UFC world champion. So things kind of worked out for Brock. So the stage was set for WrestleMania 20. Eddie Guerrero would defend his belt against Kurt Angle in a match that would see Eddie Guerrero use his famous lie, cheat, and steal methods of victory to steal a win early in the show. In the main event, though, Chris Benoit would face not only Triple H, but Shawn Michaels as well in a triple threat match for the World Heavyweight Championship. A championship that Benoit won in WCW before he left. He defeated Sid Vicious for it. However, he would never be defeated for it, as he would jump to WWE while he was still the rightful champion. Now, something that like this hadn't been seen since 1992 or 1990 when Ric Flair jumped over to WWF for a minute. And then he ended up winning the WWF Championship in the Royal Rumble when he entered number 1. So we wouldn't see the WWE Championship on the line in a Royal Rumble again for another almost over 20 years, 2016, which I think Roman Reigns or Brock Lesnar won, but no one really, it wasn't the best Rumble either. 92 by far the best Royal Rumble, and 2004 was a pretty good Rumble as well. Unfortunately, it's just looked at with, what's the opposite of rose-colored glasses, But, again, we're getting there. But the interesting thing about all of this is, again, Benoit jumping when he was the rightful champion. Just like Ric Flair, he was the WCW champion, jumped ship. Would Chris Benoit take the Ric Flair path? Well, he did just that. But we'll get to that in just a second, because when Benoit won the belt in January of 2000 at WCW Sold Out, Kevin Sullivan had taken over the booking at WCW. For those who are unaware, Kevin Sullivan was married to Nancy Sullivan. Kevin Sullivan was a booker in WCW before, and he booked a storyline where his wife Nancy was either cheating on him with Benoit, or his wife was Benoit's valet or manager. Well, life tends to imitate art in sometimes, and eventually Nancy Sullivan became Nancy Benoit in real life. And to everyone's knowledge, though, Kevin never held any ill will towards Benoit for this. He even tried to prove this to Benoit by booking him to win the World Heavyweight Championship in WCW. Benoit either still didn't trust him, or he saw that the direction where WCW was going, or maybe both, because even though Benoit won the belt, the World Heavyweight Championship was losing its prestige because WCW was not only having a string of bad luck, but their booking and storytelling was in shambles, and that's putting it lightly and mildly. Look no further than the entire title situation before and after Benoit left. Check this shit out. Sting was the champion in 99 until he was stripped for attacking a referee in an unsanctioned match. Yes, that happened. So that's how we're starting this. After Sting was stripped, Bret Hart beat Benoit in a tournament final for the belt. Well, Bret vacates it after Goldberg almost kicks his brain out of his skull, and despite Bret beating him again, it was a weird ending at Starrcade 99, Bret wouldn't wrestle for months after the kick, and he ended up vacating the belt and retiring later that year. Oh, but we're not done. Benoit then beat Sid Vicious in a tournament for the vacant belt, but it's not enough to make him stay, and he leaves for WWE. WCW finds an excuse to explain why they have to vacate the title again, and Sid Vicious defeated the Harris brothers and then Kevin Nash to win the belt. But he pinned the wrong Harris brother, so the belt was stripped and vacated again. Kevin Nash then awards himself the title, but Sid Vicious beats him for it in the same night. WCW then reboots everything and vacates every championship. Jeff Jarrett then beats DDP in a tournament, and this leads to David Arquette infamously winning the championship. So yes, they had Special Officer Doofy winning the most coveted belt in the company. So it's really easy to see why Benoit didn't want to stick around. And here he was, less than 5 years after taking the biggest risk of his career, after him and Eddie Guerrero had been told for years that they were too small or too bland to ever be major factors in a major wrestling company. He watched his best friend Eddie Guerrero retain his respective championship earlier in the night, and Benoit, along with Shawn Michaels and Triple H, delivered hands down the greatest triple threat match in WrestleMania history. You hear that, Seth Rollins? The greatest triple threat match in WrestleMania history. I don't care. Call it what you want. I'm not going to sit here and act like the shit we got last year was any good, or at least half as good as this triple threat match. It was a great match. Michaels and Triple H were best friends outside of the ring, and to me, being a kid, I assumed that Benoit would be the one pinned in this scenario, as it was unlikely Triple H or HBK would pin each other. But at the end of the night, Chris Benoit stood in the ring with his wife, his kids, confetti pouring down, and one more person would come out to congratulate him. It was none other than his best friend, Eddie Guerrero. Now, in wrestling, when another superstar or wrestler comes down to congratulate somebody for winning something, it usually ends in betrayal. This was not a wrestling moment. This was a moment where two men battled the odds figuratively and literally and came out together at the top of the mountain. Vince McMahon's philosophy was to leave the fans on a happy note at the end of big shows. In my opinion, there is no moment in wrestling greater or happier than these two men shedding literal tears, happy for each other's success through all the trials and tribulations that each of them faced. Unfortunately, life doesn't imitate art all the time. This moment, that to me is still the greatest moment in WrestleMania history, is now a bittersweet memory between two great friends. And I wish I could end the video here and say that they all lived happily ever after. Unfortunately, for those who know, it's not exactly what happened. WrestleMania 20 took place on March 14th, 2004. Eddie Guerrero would have two more legendary feuds with Rey Mysterio, which introduced the world to a young Dominic Mysterio, and his last feud would be with Batista, which saw Eddie Guerrero both loathed by fans for feuding with Rey Mysterio and then winning them back by feuding with Batista. Sadly, On November 13th, 2005, Eddie Guerrero would be found dead in his hotel room by his nephew Chavo from a massive heart attack. He was only 38 years old. Now, I remember when I was in 4th grade, and man, if you were a Latino kid, I'm barely Latino, but like, man, you felt like your uncle died type shit. Like, all the little Mexican kids in my class was hurt. But Eddie is not only considered one of the greatest luchadors of all time, but one of the greatest wrestlers of his generation. His three amigo suplexes and his frog splash are often done in tribute by multiple wrestlers across the world. And although they are imitated, nobody could ever truly imitate the great Latino heat, Eddie Guerrero. Besides his feuds with Brock, Ray, Batista, and Kurt Angle, Eddie's feud with JBL is one of the greatest modern day wrestling feuds, and I'm willing to stand on that. It might be one of the greatest of all time, but I don't know. I have to go back. But they definitely had some really great chemistry in the ring and on promos and all of that. And his death was felt not only in my 4th grade classroom, but other wrestlers were visibly upset during the WWE Raw dedicated to him on November 15th. Yes, they held a tribute show dedicated to Eddie Guerrero's honor. Chris Benoit gave a very emotional interview and through tears thanked Eddie for the impact that he had on his life. And if I'm not mistaken, he wrestled Triple H in the main event. If you look at the beginning of that specific Raw, Triple H, who was the biggest heel or bad guy in the company at the time, is consoling Benoit, has his hand on his back, and Shawn Michaels has his arm around Rey Mysterio. And I don't think there is a more emotional Raw besides the Owen Hart tribute show, probably. And during Chris Benoit's entrance, he was clearly emotional. We will never truly know to what extent the death of Eddie Guerrero affected him. Benoit would have kind of a lackluster reign as champion, I'm not going to lie. But in my opinion, politics probably played a hand in that. And he was later in 2006, him and Booker T had a best of 7 series for the United States Championship like they had in WCW, which Randy Orton subbed in for Booker T because Booker legit got hurt, but ended up winning the vacant U.S. Championship, which Benoit ended up winning from Mr. Kennedy. Benoit would then beat MVP at WrestleMania 23 in a successful title defense, but lost it a month later to MVP in May of 2007. In June of 2007, Benoit was drafted to the newly revamped ECW brand, where he was slated to beat CM Punk for the vacant ECW championship on June 24th at the Vengeance pay-per-view. Chris Benoit would unfortunately wrestle his last match on June 19th, 2007. On June 23rd, he would leave a voicemail on Chavo Guerrero's phone that his wife and kid had food poisoning, and so he would be late for a non-televised event before Vengeance. Chavo then talked to Benoit at 3:44 p.m. EDT, which Chavo himself describes as a very eerie conversation in hindsight. Benoit would miss that night's event, but communicated and assured Chavo that he would be at the pay-per-view and that he would need a ride from the airport in the morning. At around 4 a.m. On June 24th, text messages were sent from both Chris and Nancy Benoit's phones to friends and family. In the messages were pictures of Benoit's home and instructions on where the dogs were located. And before I get into any more details, let me just say, during these conversations that Chavo has described, there has been a conspiracy theory for decades now that there was some sort of scuffle that Chavo heard over the phone. I have scoured the internet for any kind of Chavo Guerrero interview where he insinuates that he heard Chris Benoit in a struggle. He did do a podcast with Chris Jericho about 12 years after the fact. And he said that Chris Benoit sounded groggy and that he said, "I love you" in a very weird way. Very in a very elongated kind of sad way. There is nothing from Chavo describing Chris sounding like he was in danger or like he was being, forced to say these things. There's nothing. There's no sign of a struggle in the Benoit house. There's no sign of anybody being there besides Benoit and his family. Those interviews, or an interview where Chavo describes Chris Benoit being in danger, is completely false. And the rumors or the speculation in his audio recordings from the Benoit house voicemail box has also had you can hear voices in the recordings. That is because they are recording the recordings. They are just literally they have a tape recorder of some sort, and they are recording the messages that are playing on Benoit's phone. So you hear a little bit of background noise. There is no kid screaming in the back or saying "help me." There is nobody on the phone telling Benoit to hang up or whatever the rumors are. I just want to dispel those, because the persistent rumors after all these years that it was somebody else that did it, they have to stop. The cope, whatever it is, it's not true. There is no evidence to support these conspiracies or theories. None. What we do know is on June 25th, Chris Benoit, his wife and son were found dead at their family home at around noon. Police informed WWE that the Benoit house was a major crime scene and that they were conducting an investigation. WWE and the world were shocked, and they had limited details about anything that happened, so WWE held a tribute show in his honor. I can vividly remember this because a week before this happened, Vince McMahon was doing a storyline where his limousine was blown up and his character was killed off. What he was thinking or where this storyline was going to go, who knows? We'll never know, because he canceled it for obvious reasons. What we will also never know is what happened exactly to trigger possibly the biggest tragedy in wrestling history, because even though WWE held a tribute show in Chris's honor, by the end of the night, the details had emerged and police confirmed that over the weekend, Chris Benoit murdered his wife, his son, and then did himself in. That's the bare truth. No, it wasn't Kevin Sullivan. No, it wasn't Vince McMahon. Chris Benoit murdered his wife and son and then took himself out. I'm under the belief that it wasn't one thing. It was a mixture of several factors, obviously, over the years of abusing drugs, his body, and his wife, culminated in him murdering his family and then unaliving himself. CTE was also a major factor in guys like Steve Austin, Undertaker, Chris Jericho. They can downplay concussions. They can do all of the downplaying of it all they want. CTE is real. The effects are real. And I don't see how any of those guys can be like, well, sometimes I get headaches or, no. Undertaker got concussed by Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania. Doesn't even remember the match. I would like to see those same guys, Undertaker and all those guys, tell the families of Jovan Belcher, Junior Seau, and Dave Duerson that CTE isn't real. People online speculate that Eddie's death may have caused Benoit to psychologically break down. Not just Eddie's death, but Ray Traylor, aka Big Boss Man's death, seemingly impacted Benoit as well, in letters released by Benoit's father after his death. As I said, there's so much speculation on what happened or what triggered it. We can go on all day about it. But the reality is Benoit did what he did. Benoit did it. Brain scans on Benoit revealed that his brain resembled that of an 80-year-old dementia patient. And here's why I think that's a very credible cause, but it's not a valid excuse. All right, while Benoit was clearly having neurological issues or issues stemming from decades of concussions he sustained from wrestling, to act like he was in some sort of trance or did not know what he was doing, all signs point to the contrary, and that he was lucid enough to text friends and family. Plus, I'm leaving the fact out that he killed his wife on Friday, sedated and then suffocated his son on Saturday, and then offed himself on Sunday. There is no way you can convince me that for 72 hours, Benoit wasn't just this wasn't some freak thing that happened in seconds. No, it's not like he just went crazy. No, this was calculated. There were Google searches on the computer that hinted that Benoit may have been planning this. There's no way you can convince me for 72 hours that Benoit was just unaware and completely out of what he was doing. He wasn't himself. No, he was him. That was Benoit. I think he just didn't want to face those consequences, and he may have been on borrowed time anyways. He had an enlarged heart and a failing liver. Doctors say that he may have been dead within that year from natural causes anyway. And allegedly, him and Nancy had some kind of argument over life insurance beforehand. Allegedly, who knows how that may have played a factor, if it happened at all. But the fact is, you took out two innocent people, and it's just like Paul Heyman said. Two people didn't have a choice. Benoit had a choice that day, and he chose wrong. And he should absolutely be facing consequences and the brunt of all of it. Can't mask that. And for WWE and how they've handled it, it's been great to me, honestly. Some people argue, well, he did German suplexes really good, and he had great in-ring work, so we should just, to not have Benoit in the Hall of Fame is a joke. Let me retort that by saying the WWE Hall of Fame in general is a fucking joke, so we can just move past that. After the truth about Chris came to light, WWE did everything they could to scrub him from WWE history. Understandably so. You could probably tell the story of WWE and kind of leave Benoit out. Nobody really notices anything. But you cannot tell the story of wrestling. You cannot talk about Kurt Angle's greatest matches and leave out Benoit. You can't tell the story of Eddie Guerrero without Chris Benoit, unfortunately. Benoit and Eddie celebrating in the ring at the end of WrestleMania 20 is one of, if not the greatest moments in wrestling history. It encapsulates a rare moment of history that is both the purest of wholesomeness with an aftermath that is comparable to a Shakespearean tragedy. Eddie and Chris loved each other as brothers in life, and unfortunately in death they are remembered for different reasons. And I wanted to make this video because their careers intertwined and parallel each other so much in life, yet in death there is a clear and concise differential in how they are remembered for good reason. There is absolutely no excuse for what Chris Benoit did, and he doesn't deserve to be pedestalized in any way after what he did by that company. If you choose to still put him up there with great workers and do all that, sure. But what he did does not deserve to be glossed over and just thought, well, let's just only talk about his in-ring. No. No. Nah, he fucked that up, gang. He fucked that up. And Chris Benoit's career doesn't deserve to be forgotten or swept under the rug, necessarily. The memory of him. It should serve as a warning. It doesn't deserve any romanticizing or pedestalization. That is not my intention with this video. He may have been a great man and a good friend on the surface, but great men and great friends don't put their friends and family through what Chris Benoit put people through. Period. All that shit goes out the window. Doesn't matter. Well, he in private, he would no. We know what he did in private. It bled over into personal, and unfortunately, it killed his legacy. Killed it. Pardon the pun. The final piece of irony in all of this is Eddie overcame his demons, and what were very public and he was very public and outspoken with his struggles, and Benoit kept his demons tucked away, and eventually he would let them consume him. And I hope y'all enjoyed this video for real, for real. I know I didn't even talk about the Wikipedia post that speculated Nancy's death hours before it was confirmed, but I watched literally the full interrogation of this 19-year-old that made the post. I am fully convinced that the whole thing was a crazy coincidence. That's just my thoughts on the matter. I know the kid stayed near Massachusetts or the WWE headquarters. It's literally just a crazy coincidence. And I thought I'm one of the biggest people at the time when this happened was just like, there's no way, like Chris didn't do it. But as I'm older, you just gotta face reality and the harsh truth of it. And honestly, that's just my thoughts on the matter. If you stayed and watched this entire video, I greatly appreciate it. I have at least one more long video along with some other videos I'm working on dropping soon. Gonna be streaming on my other channel, blast from the past, but Game Gang Live. Go follow that on YouTube. If you already subbed to this channel, go catch me and all my live thoughts and Let's Plays over on that channel. There's gonna be more direct written videos on this channel if I haven't said that before. But again, I'm not trying to do this video to try and humanize or make light of what Benoit did. His story deserves to be told, studied, and criticized just like everyone else, and not just wrestling history, but history in general. And the more we talk about it and show not just wrestlers, but everyone, the dangers of concussions and everything that he was doing, just remember, if you show everybody their long-term effects and how people like me that remember how special that WrestleMania moment was, yet understand that because of Benoit's own actions, that memory is forever stained with anger, sadness, confusion, and the classic question of, what if? But thank y'all again for tuning in. It's been your boy, A.N.T. This is one of my longer videos. Again, I appreciate it if you stayed and watched this whole thing. Just wanted to get this off my chest, goddamn. But yeah, hope y'all appreciated it. Y'all be safe. Don't get smoked. It's been your boy, A.N.T. I'm out. Peace.